entitled Vision of the Divine Form as Including All Forms. This chapter, 11, like all the others, is to be applied to the individual, for while many classes of being, with their degrees of consciousness and power, are continually referred to, a clear indication is given that each divine ego is primarily the self, and consists within his being every element that exists in the universe. Arjuna begins in this chapter by saying, "My delusion has been dispersed by the words which thou for my soul's peace hast spoken concerning the mystery of the Adhyatma, the spirit." He had perceived that the one self animates all forms of every kind, that the sustaining power as well as the perceiving power is within each and every form. But he desired to see and understand the form or container of self, in other words, the means by which the one became focused, so to speak, in the innumerable forms of existence. Krishna in reply gives the key to the answer in one sentence. "Here in my body, now behold, O Gudakesha, the whole universe animate and inanimate, gathered here in one, and all things else thou hast a wish to see. But as with thy natural eyes thou art not able to see me, I will give thee the divine eye." Here it is evident that the body Krishna spoke of was a spiritual one, since it required the divine eye to see it, and that Arjuna could not perceive this highest form unless he himself possessed similar sight. Body implies form and substance, and in this relation must mean the highest conceivable primordial matter or substance, which to us might be comprehended as, quote, luminosity and energy, unquote, the source of all light and power. The words, "the divine form as including all forms," imply that there are no forms but those which the divine form includes, from which it may be understood that the substratum of every form is the same primordial substance spoken of in this chapter as the divine form, and that every being possesses a divine form which contains within it potentially every power and element. In this ancient teaching it is to be found the true basis of evolution, an unfolding from within outwards. The descriptive portions of this chapter may be better understood if the student will bear in mind that the Gita, as we have it in our language, is a rendition from the Sanskrit, the latter being a scientific language whose every letter has a numerical value with the corresponding sound and meaning, whereas our language is that of a fighting and a trading people, with a paucity of terms for anything beyond the physical. One will not then make the mistake of thinking that such descriptions are due to a childish and ignorant imagery, but in reality to a knowledge of powers, forces, beings, and states of consciousness. Sanjaya, the recorder of the dialogue, says, "Hari, Krishna, the mighty Lord of mysterious power, showed to the son of Pritha, Arjuna, his supreme form with many mouths and eyes and many wonderful appearances, with many divine ornaments, many celestial weapons upraised, adorned with celestial garlands and robes, anointed with celestial ointments and perfumes, full of every marvelous thing, the eternal God whose face is turned in all directions." The eternal God is the perceiver within the divine form. The face, turned in all directions, is the divine form, which like a spherical mirror reflects all things. All differentiations of substance occur within the divine form, and each differentiation necessitates its own peculiar modes of expression and appearances, corresponding to mouths, eyes, and wonderful forms. It has been said of old that the deity geometrizes. All forms evolve from within outwards, from the quote, point, unquote, whose center is everywhere and circumference nowhere, a radiation equal in all directions begins and establishes a circumference, a sphere within which the activity of the point is particularly confined. The point spreading out horizontally becomes a diameter dividing the sphere into positive and negative hemispheres, forming a basis for action and reaction. A further extension of the point vertically to the circumference divides the sphere into 4 parts, represented on a plane surface as a cross within the circle. Remembering that these extensions of the point or center are lines of force proceeding from the center and tending to return to it, we can conceive of the beginning of a revolution of the sphere whereby the ends of the vertical and horizontal lines extend towards each other, forming at first the ansated cross and finally the square within the circle, in reality a cube or 6-sided figure within the sphere. The cube, if looked at from either side, presents the appearance of 4 angles, which, if we can conceive of them as being luminous points, equidistant from the bright center, would be seen as a 4-pointed star, the symbol and sign of the animal kingdom. If we can imagine Arjuna as seeing within the divine form all living lines of force and the forms produced by them, the 4, the 5, the 6-pointed star, and the many-sided figures, all in motion and of wonderful brilliancy of light and of many colors, presenting the activities of all beings of every grade in the universe, we may obtain some conception of the descriptive parts of this chapter. Quote, I am time matured, come hither for the destruction of all these creatures. Unquote. Time matured means the completion of cycles. Everything that begins in time ends in time. Every action has its own cycle or period of return or reaction. It is action and actions that produce cycles, and these latter range from those of a momentary duration to those of the great age, as they are produced by separate entities, classes of beings, or the collectivity of actions by all beings of every grade concerned in any particular stream of evolution. The general reference here is to the impermanence of all forms or combinations of them. Change is necessitated by progress, for without change there would be stagnation. Hence the constant disintegration and reintegration of elements in ever-changing relation and form, all brought about by the requirements of the perceiver, the real man within, who is the sole survivor through all changes. Thou art the one indivisible being and non-being, that which is supreme. This statement can only be understood by each one applying it to himself. We know that we are not our bodies, for they constantly change, while we remain the same identity through all the changes. We are not our, quote, minds, unquote, for we change them whenever we find occasion to do so. If we were our minds, we could not change them, and further, it is apparent that change cannot see change. Only that which is permanent can see change. That permanency is the real, the immortal man, or, as the voice of the silence states it, the man that was and is and will be, for whom the hour shall never strike. Each is the self, the perceiver, non-being, yet the cause and sustainer of being, as the Gita states it in this chapter. Thou art the knower and that which is to be known. Thou art the final supreme receptacle of this universe, the garnerer of all experience when this universe is dissolved. At the end of the great cycle, which includes all minor cycles, all beings return to the primordial state, plus the experience gained. The next great stream of evolution will proceed on the basis of the acquired knowledge of all beings concerned. Quote, having been ignorant of thy majesty, I took thee for a friend, and have called thee, O Krishna, O son of Yadu, O friend. And blinded by my affection and presumption, I have at times treated thee without respect in sport, in recreation, in repose, in thy chair and at thy meals, in private and in public. All this I beseech thee, O inconceivable being, to forgive." Unquote. Krishna is to be considered as not only representing the self in all beings, but as a divine being embodied in a human form. Arjuna had asked to see the divine form, and having seen it, was awed by its grandeur and glory, and realized that he had conducted himself towards Krishna as a human being like himself, although of vastly greater learning. He therefore besought forgiveness for his presumption, and asked Krishna to resume the form to which he was accustomed. Here in this ancient scripture is pictured the fatal error made again and again by mankind in the failure to recognize a divine teacher when he appears among them in human guise. Buddha, Jesus, and many others before and after them were treated by their contemporaries as ordinary human beings actuated by similar motives as the rest of mankind. They were opposed by the established interests, religious and otherwise, because the doctrines they taught were destructive of the hard and fast conclusions upon which those interests were founded. Their speech and acts, although intended to instruct, enlighten and benefit, were construed as violations of law and custom, and were frequently characterized as criminal in nature. Even among their immediate disciples, suspicion, doubt, jealousy, fear, resentment, and self-interest were to be found, none of which could have had existence had the real nature of the teacher been understood. These conditions prevented the true relation between teacher and disciple, which is so necessary to the latter if he would benefit fully from that relation. It is true that all the disciples learned something in spite of their defects, but it is also true that the lack of intuitive perception of the divine nature of their teachers was the most important factor in the failure of those disciples to truly transmit the teachings they had received. For that lack closed the door in themselves through which the divine enlightenment could come. Even Arjuna, loyal and devoted disciple as he was, had failed to perceive the wondrous nature of his teacher. It was not until that teacher, by his favor and power, had caused the divine eye in Arjuna to open, that the ability to see on that plane of substance was gained. It is natural to suppose that Arjuna had, by his unshaken confidence and constant devotion, arrived at a stage of development where such help was merited. It might be well for students of theosophy to consider whether they may not have made a similar mistake in regard to those who brought the message of theosophy to the Western world, and so kept closed the only door through which direct help could come. In the closing portion of the chapter, Krishna says, "I am not to be seen, even as I have shown myself to thee, by study of the Vedas, scriptures, nor by mortifications, nor almsgiving, nor sacrifices. I am to be approached and seen and known in truth by means of that devotion which has me alone as the object." The following, written by one of the teachers, may serve as an explanation of the foregoing paragraph. Ishvara, the spirit in man, is untouched by any troubles, works, fruits of works, or desires, and when a firm position is assumed with the end in view of reaching union with spirit through concentration, he, that spirit, comes to the aid of the lower self and raises it gradually to higher planes. The firm position and concentration are one and the same. It means a lifetime's devotion, an acting for and as the self in all things. He whose actions are for me alone, who esteemeth me the supreme goal, who is my servant only, without attachment to the results of action, and free from enmity towards any creature, cometh to me, O son of Pandu.